In the time that my wife Karen and I know as BC, before children, we found a great deal of joy in hiking the mountains of Colorado. And a few times we planned to hike to the top of one of the 14ers there. There's something like 53 14,000 foot or above sea level mountains at the peaks. And we discovered that there's actually a lot to learn before one puts on one's boot and fanny pack to look for the trailhead. We had lived in Denver for less than a month when two other couples invited us to climb Mount Bierstadt, which is 14,060 feet above sea level. They had some experience, and the trail itself, we were told, was fairly easy, kind of a pathway that you'd walk on, nothing sort of too rocky or difficult or too steep. Certainly no rock climbing. The path was pretty certain, right to the top. It went right to the very top. And we did it. And we realized in conversation in the weeks that followed, when we would say, yeah, we climbed, and then would mention one of the 14ers, that was a prized thing. Wow, we did something that Coloradans say, oh, that's awesome, that's great, yeah, you're getting right into it. It was a great day. We loved the people we were with. We loved the amazing view we had, the 360-degree view as we spun around at the top of Mount Bierstadt. Just extraordinary. Now, the following year, just the two of us did one of these alone. It was called Mount Princeton. It stands at 14,197 feet above sea level, and it's just in the south part of Colorado Springs. Maybe some of you have climbed Mount Princeton or one of these that I'm talking about in Colorado. We heard it wasn't too hard. We took our dog Nellie. But this was a very different experience. The pathway up would lead to places where there was nothing obvious about where it went. So we might come up to this large, what they called scree, this large area where there was boulders for maybe 200 yards across and 100 yards up, and the trail came to that, and then you looked, and you didn't know where you were supposed to go exactly, and there was no trail across the scree. You got your way hopping across stones, making your way, doing so very carefully. Dog came across with us, and so forth. But when you got to the other side of the scree, you didn't know where you were relative to the path. You had to go look for it, and it's not always obvious. As inexperienced as we were, it wouldn't be hard for us to get lost somehow in these things. About 2 hours in, we noticed that Nellie was limping. I don't know if you knew this, but dogs' paws aren't made for rock climbing. Who knew? Nellie was limping. She was bleeding. But it wasn't getting lost, nor Nellie's paws that were bleeding that were the main obstacles for the day. Rather, it was something called a false summit. Mount Princeton had one. Not all mountains do. After hours of going up, staring from time to time as we were sure we were staring at the top, the peak of the mountain, 14,197 feet up, making our way towards it, only to find that there stood, at some point we discovered, something larger, dominating the sky, extraordinarily behind what we were staring at. What's that? That's the peak. Because we were staring at a false summit that stood in the way as we hiked. We couldn't see it. We were blinded. First, it's just confusing. Is it a mirage? Do I need some more water? It's Mount Princeton. And then it dawns. Oh my gosh, that's a false summit? Continuing our course means that we will reach a peak of about 13,000 feet. No conversation at the water bubble or no attaboys, no attagirls for doing that. So before we reached the true summit, we turned around because Nellie's paws were in fact getting worse, and we loved Nellie. So despite that, it was an unforgettable day, and we're glad we did it. On the night before his trial, his last night with his disciples over a meal, Jesus says and does arguably the most important things of his earthly ministry, short of his death and resurrection. What he says and what he does are profound. I'll say it's the heart of what he wants to communicate to his disciples. It's his last night with them. Here he's going to tell them he loves them. Here he's going to tell them to believe in him. Here he's going to tell them to not worry about the departure of which he's speaking. Here he's going to tell them that it's his going away is for their good, saying, I will come again to you and take you to myself, that where I am, you will be also. That was today's gospel, part of it. Now, this past week, on Thursday, we had a memorial service for Charlene Magliolo. And John 14, 1 through 6 was the text. Same text as this morning. Funerals often have John 14, verses 1 through 6 as their gospel text. Because these verses encapsulate for us the assurance that when we die, Jesus will come and take us to be with him into the Father's household, where there's plenty of room. So if you're here today, then you've probably heard all that. I hope you believe it. Just as real as that 13,000-foot some odd peak we were climbing. It's real. We want to go to heaven. We have come to believe that Jesus is truly the way God has opened to us to get there. And it is truly good news. But there's something else here that I really want you to see. For people who've grown up in the, quote, believe in Jesus because that's the way to get to heaven, end quote, and that's it. Kind of nothing to it. It's free. It's a gift. What Jesus says here in the text of John 14 could look like a whole other awesome peak coming into view when you had been staring at something that was real and true, but not the big picture. It's an amazing invitation that he offers this morning, and I don't want you to miss it. It's a mutual, it's an invitation to something that we might call mutual indwelling. Mutual indwelling. Jesus says, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. One in the other in the one. Philip, I tell you, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Perfectly mirrored in the life of Jesus because there was a mutual indwelling. It's a God inhabiting our minds, our souls, and bodies in an intimate connection for Sunday, May the 14th, and Monday, May the 15th, and forever. So unfortunately, many people who got a little religion in Sunday school as a kid, or through a few sermons perhaps on the radio here and there, saying yes to heaven and Jesus, are not hearing this invitation. And it's human nature to take the easiest route. That's how we got to the false summit. We thought this was going to be the end of it. And if Jesus is all about heaven in the hereafter, they got it. They heard it. They said, yes, Jesus, take me with you. And now they'll go on with their lives. Doesn't cost them anything. It's human nature to say, how little can I do and still get to heaven? On that theory, on that sort of process. But what they miss is God's pledge. God's pledge to make his home with you. Here. Now. In this life. If I go away, I will come and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Mutual indwelling. God indwelling us. A little further on in John 14, we hear this, we begin this next week. He tells us this is accomplished through the Spirit. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. That mutual indwelling of Jesus being in the Father and the Father being in Jesus is now offered to us. A kind of oneness right into the very life of the Trinity by the work of the Holy Spirit and the willingness of our own hearts, minds, souls, and bodies. That's the true summit, if you will. Mutual indwelling that never ends. A relationship where we really get on the inside of what it is to be loved by God and dwell in the love of God. Now, there's a cost to this. There's a cost. We have to learn to love God's way. And it ain't easy. It ain't easy. It's not simple to understand. And it's even harder to do. But that's the invitation. And that's the way of Jesus. He is truly the way. And like pressing on to get the joy of the real summit, that pressing on in the life, trying to follow Jesus, it's going to take work. Now, why would anyone want to make this effort? What difference would it make? We have a great example today in our reading from Acts of the Apostle. Now, Stephen, it says, Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit. Do you hear that? You ought to think, oh, so he was being indwelt, Spirit in him in the Spirit, life of the Trinity. Stephen is in this place of oneness. And what happens when he's in that place? Does he do it perfectly? No, he's like you and me. But the offer is to you and to me, imperfect as we are, to this mutual indwelling. And it says this, because Stephen is going to go through a gruesome and painful death by stoning, if you can imagine. And he is doing precisely what Jesus in his own death does on the cross. Like Jesus, he's praying for those who are killing him. Jesus says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Stephen says, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. That's the fruit of someone who's filled with the Holy Spirit, who's worked at loving as Jesus does. He's loving just the way Jesus loved God and others. So climbing 14ers can be a real challenge. Being fooled by a false summit may make for an interesting day. But here, Stephen is forgiving other people. Not forgiving others is the soil, the fertile soil of a ruined life and a ruined world. It's so important to our own soul, our well-being, our happiness, and that of the people around us that we know how to forgive and we forgive. Just as a starter, we're just taking the one example here in the Scriptures. What difference does it make if you don't or do press on? It's a world of difference. An absolute, whole, entirely different world of difference to you and to others and to the very mission of Jesus Christ. What he wants to do for, in, and through each of us and everyone.